Michael Tubbs, Stockton's new mayor as of January 1st. And I know that there are a lot of policy and priority topics that you would like to talk about. But before we start that, it's kind of a milestone for you. I mean, it's not kind of a milestone for you, it is a milestone for you. You're at 26, you're becoming the mayor of Stockton. And I'd like if you could just pause for a moment and just talk about what it's like to see this day finally arrive.
Man, it's such an incredible honor. Growing up in Nightingale or Lewis Park or townhomes, when survival is kind of the focus, it's really hard to dream about sort of, I could be the mayor of the city one day. So it's incredibly humbling. It's a huge opportunity, and I tell people all the time, it's nothing like serving where you're from. So when we talk about the crime, or we talk about the schools, or we talk about what we used to have, those are things I all personally experienced. So there's a little bit of a urgency, and it's real personal for me, and it's a real honor. It's not every day that anyone gets to be mayor of their city, much less at 26 years old. So I'm excited, so thankful for God for it. I understand it's going to be a challenge, but the 4 years on city council have been great preparation in terms of what's possible, what's doable, and what we can be doing better.
What's the biggest thing you learned from your 4 years on the city council that helped to prepare you for this role?
I think it's a couple things that I've learned while on city council that has prepared me for this role. Number one being that you can't do anything by yourself. That you can lead, but you have to lead with people. And if no one's behind you, you're not really leading, right? So just the importance of relationships and spending deep time in investing in with the people you have to work with to serve the people you care about. And then number two, that government can't do everything, but that can't be an excuse for government to do nothing. And I think oftentimes people vacillate between those extremes. Like, well, government can't do everything. Yeah, that's true, but doesn't mean government can't do anything. And there's a lot you can do. So when I look at even the strides we made in 4 years in South Stockton, the stuff we've been able to do and get started, and the processes we put in place, just 4 or 5 years ago, people thought a lot of that stuff would never happen, or was impossible, or that it was just a desolate place. So that has also showed me the role the government can have in setting priorities and bringing people together and beginning actionable steps to move outcomes and make change.
So let's move on. You have shared with me 5 priorities that you've established as you take office, and we might as well go in the order that you sent them to me in. And the first of those is the hot zone strategy. And can you, first of all, explain to people who are watching this briefly what those are, and then we can talk about some of your ideas.
Absolutely. So 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, in the original Marshall Plan report, there was analysis done that found that there's 5 to 6 areas in Stockton where crime is higher than other parts of the city. And what's interesting and what people don't know on first glance is that the majority of those areas are north of Harding Way. It's not all South Stockton, East Stockton. That 4 of the 5 most violent and crime-ridden parts of the city are actually north, almost as far north as Thornton Road. So thus far, response as a community to these communities has been more cops, more law enforcement, and there's definitely a role for law enforcement. But these communities don't just have high crime. They have high poverty, high unemployment. They're high in things that are not good, and they're low in things that are good, or indicators of a healthy community. So crime is top of mind for everyone in Stockton, and to really get at our crime issues and also to change our image, it's going to start with really investing in these communities that for many years have had worse outcomes. And I lived in 3 or 4 of them myself growing up, so I know these aren't just talking points. These are real things that are happening on the ground. And I think with focusing that way, it makes our crime problem more manageable. And it also gives us some things to look to. And if you help the worst, then you really have found something that scales for everyone else, and everyone benefits by really investing in these areas. So they're not communities of hot spot communities of crime, but really communities of opportunity.
And I think people a lot of times don't realize that when a vast preponderance of the crime that's committed in the city of Stockton, especially the violent crime, is committed by a very small group of people. So by addressing some of those problems, you can make a disproportionate impact on the overall problem, can't you?
Which absolutely translates into another priority. It's our ceasefire strategy focuses on the 87 guys, 0.01% of the population that commit between 65 and 80% of our violent crime. 87 guys. And we know who they are. Their average age is about 26 years old. They've been on probation and parole. 83% of them are on probation and parole. They're not mysteries to us. We're in contact with them as institutions a lot. And again, law enforcement has a role. But if even 30 of the guys decide they want to change, and if they're given real opportunity, whether it's tattoo removals, whether it's job training and job placement, then that has a significant impact on our violent crime rating. And if you look at the stuff Richmond's been doing and Oakland's been doing, and really figuring out how do they invest in these guys, how they keep a focus on keeping shootings and homicides down, it's paid dividends. It's not easy, and it's difficult. It requires some resources, but it's incredibly important and something that I will be hammering on for the next 4 years.
One of the things that you suggest is increasing the involvement of organizations like Community Partnership for Families and other groups. What are you hoping that organizations like those can bring to those troubled areas, A? And B, there's a way, do you view those as ways, low-cost ways that don't require a lot of new funding to address some of these problems?
Yeah, absolutely. I think oftentimes, because the problems are huge, people assume that money is the only answer. And there's definitely a role for resources, but oftentimes what I've found is that if we just reprioritize, recalibrate, and kind of collectively put things in and do what we're already doing better, it would have huge benefits. And then we have a stronger case for asking for more resources. So yeah, I think if you look at the work we've done in South Stockton with the Reinvent South Stockton Coalition, it's been a coalition of nonprofits, for housing developers, and residents around a table consistently speaking about what can we do to improve outcomes in South Stockton. And it's that same sort of process and strategy that's going to be required of these other hot zone communities. And what's interesting is that for the Reinvent South Stockton work, that's been trying to fix outcomes for a population of 50,000. But these hot zone communities are literally 100 houses, 150 houses, a cul-de-sac, a lot more manageable. So we can invest time in working with the community-based organizations like the Partnership for Families to build relationships with the people in the neighborhoods to hear what they need. What is it? What's lacking here? I have an idea, but I don't live here. So what exactly is needed? And then once we do that, we can begin to connect needs to resources. And if we find that there is a gap, then we have a much more compelling story to tell to private industry, to government agencies, or to philanthropists in the philanthropic community as to this area of 100 people. We've built relationships with them. These are the things we're doing for them. We're connecting them to services. We're connecting them to this. We're connecting them to that. But these are the gaps we have. And then people are much more willing to put up money for something like that because we've done the work and figuring out what we have capacity for and what we don't.
And one of the things that you are talking about doing is having some hot zone town halls. How soon do you envision the first of those taking place, and what are you hoping would come out of those? I think you kind of answered the second part of that question already, but how give me a look at what one of these town halls is going to look like and how soon it might occur.
Well, in terms of a timeline, as soon as possible would be ideal for me, but because the mayor's office also has new staff positions, we have to go through the city process for those people to come on board, which may not happen until late January, early February. And they would need to be a part of whatever town hall. So I would say February for the first one would be a good idea. Working closely with nonprofits and providers and people who are on the ground doing the work, understanding that I don't know or can't do anything, but I can bring some leadership and some attention to the issue. But basically, one or two ways. The town hall will either be a culmination of like a month-long or a week-long relationship building process with door knocking and community assessments, or be a kickoff for that, and still playing around which one works. And then it'll be regularly or routinely scheduled, so it's not just a one-time deal, but that for the next couple of years, I'm deeply involved and engaged in these parts of the city that have some of the most problems.
Mhm. So that it doesn't feel like just sort of a one-off.
Yeah, no. It would have to be, if not, probably quarterly. I'm still working out the logistics, but it would be definitely consistent relationships and talking and convening around with community leaders in the area, concerned parties, but also the residents there, so they know that the mayor and the city cares, and that we can't do everything, and these problems have been around for a long time, but we can do something.
You mentioned the identification of the worst slumlords and the worst properties, and the use of the city attorney's office. We've seen some of that, I think, with New Grand Save, and also before that there were some apartments near Cannabis Car Wash that went through that whole receivership process. But I'm guessing you want to see a lot more of that. You think that's an effective way to deal with some of those?
Not necessarily just receivership, but if people can identify the 10 worst slumlords and the 10 worst properties, and they've been that way for 50 years, and nothing changes, that suggests something needs to be done. So I think we should absolutely start with the conversation. Like, this is no longer an acceptable way to run your business in this city. What do you need? Do you need help? How can we help you? But then if that doesn't work, we have to, I think, exhaust every tool we have at our disposal. Not to be mean people taking things away, but to really improve the quality of life of residents, but also improve the image of our city. People should know that to do business in Stockton it's great, but it's a privilege, right? And that the people in Stockton demand and deserve quality, and not slumlords, not absentee landlords, not properties or stores and things that have been cesspools of crime and illegal activity. That's just no longer acceptable. So we have to do everything we can as a city with the resources we have to convey that message in a way.
And overall, what I see is you feel a more holistic approach is needed than maybe has been done before, and you even tie the voter passage of the library and recreation tax into the whole thing. You feel all of this overall strategy, given time and patience, can really make a lasting impact?
Oh, absolutely. We have such an incredible opportunity in this city right now that I'm excited about. We have Measure A and B to hire more officers, but also more peacekeepers, and also fund the Office of Violence Prevention. We have Measure M money, which is going to be incredible for us to use to pay for more parks and more recreation services, and give more hours and more library hours, and even, if possible, build a library north of Harding Way for the folks out there. But it would be a wasted opportunity if we're not strategic with tying this new revenue to our pressing needs and goals. So if economic development's an issue, workforce development's an issue, let's make sure we use some of this Measure M money so that kids and adults are able to gain skills in our libraries and in our rec centers. If crime's an issue, let's make sure we're leveraging Measure M dollars to do things like midnight basketball like they do in LA, or the Summer Night Lights program like they do in LA, to kind of or to invest in these underserved hot zone areas that are spread throughout the city. So what people can expect from me is that even similarly disparate pieces will all have a role in, at least from my perspective, in addressing some of Stockton's core structural issues. And I know people are going to get annoyed about me saying it all the time and tying everything back to it, but that's really what's going to be needed. For the past 30 years, we've been double the state average in violent crime and homicides. That's unacceptable to me, especially now that we have the tools to begin to start addressing that.
Let's go off of this for just a moment here. There's a limit to what you can do as mayor. The city does not have a strong mayor approach. We've heard a lot about a strong mayor system for the past 4 years. Mm-hmm. So how do you differentiate between what you want to accomplish and the very real limitations on your office?
Well, just because Stockton's not a strong mayor city doesn't mean you can't be a strong leader. And what I've seen, and I mean, it takes longer. It's a lot more difficult. You can't just say something and it happens. But what I've learned as a city council person is that people do respond to leadership. So there's limitations to the powers of the office formally, but there's not limitations to what we can do to make Stockton better. So I'm as creative as possible. That's why a lot of it's working with community-based organizations. That's why a lot of it's building relationship with my councils and having them see their priorities reflected in the things I talk about consistently. So yeah, I'm not too worried about that actually. I think that the issues we have in this city are so large that we have to begin the work of beginning to solve them. And the mayor for sure can't do everything, as I like to say, but there's a lot I can do. And what I'm prepared to do, I have on paper or have some checklists and some timelines. I'll be working hard in the governing structure we have to make it happen. Then when I get frustrated, then it's time to make the case to the people. If 72% of people voted for me, so there's a huge mandate to actually get some stuff done. So I think we all understand that, and we'll all work within the confines of government to ensure that we're upholding our end of the bargain in terms of what it will take to reinvent and move the city forward.
All right, your second priority is economic development, and one of the things you talked about is enhanced infrastructure, financing districts, and the other, you listed two things, community revitalization and investment authorities to bring more affordable housing. Obviously, aging infrastructure in the city is a big deal, especially in some of the areas that need to be redeveloped, and obviously affordable housing. I mean, that goes without saying. Can you talk about how these tools might work if you can access them?
With the community investment boards, those are essentially redevelopment 2.0s. So they could do things like affordable housing, but they can also do a lot of economic development activities too. And there's another tool we can have in our toolkit. They're pretty new. The state legislature, I think, just approved them this last session. So people are still figuring out how to use it, what does it do, what does it look like. But I know with our redevelopment agency, we're able to do a lot of things for good or for bad in the downtown and other parts of the city. And when that went away, a lot of that impetus behind improving historically underserved parts of the city went away, but bringing something like that back will allow us to continue the downtown revitalization and also allow us to revitalize our neighborhoods and really think about for Airport Way or for other parts of Main Street, how do we entice people to invest in these areas? Because there's money to be made in those locations. In terms of the infrastructure tool, again, that's also a newer tool that I'm not too familiar with. I just know that it sounds like it could be a win for Stockton. So kind of working with our staff, doing research and making sure that we're exhausting all the available tools we have in our toolkit to really bring economic development and business here, because people need to work, people need jobs with dignity, and there's also, it's a misnomer that I'm in meetings all the time when we talk about, I'm in meetings with former employees that are saying, oh, they can't find jobs, and I'm in meetings with employers that are saying we can't find workers. So a big part I may not have sent to you is also figuring out what does workforce development look like for this city, and how do we make sure there's not this mismatch, because it's the most frustrating thing ever to hear from people. I'm trying to hire people, I can't hire anyone. And to hear from folks, I'm trying to get a job, I can't get one. So that drives me crazy. And another thing, other economic development is also just saying the conditions so that entrepreneurs and other folks can thrive here. So continuing the reforms in our permit center so it's as easy and seamless as possible. So people get in, get out, they get what they need. But also making sure in terms of infrastructure, our Wi-Fi is fast. And it's at speed. People are able to use it and utilize it. Making sure that the environment we create is where entrepreneurs feel comfortable taking risks coming to Stockton. So that's kind of, and also when we talk about entrepreneurship, I think people always assume it's going to be people from the outside coming in, and that's a part. But we have so many entrepreneurs in this city. A lot of them who are immigrants, a lot of them who may not be as comfortable with the language, or a lot of them who just really are doing things from their houses or at flea markets, that if they were given some tools and some resources to make those businesses come online, we could collect the tax revenue and they could expand. Because I think I read something that the majority of businesses in America are small businesses. So a big part of Stockton's economic development strategy has to be, how do we help existing small businesses expand?
Moving on to the Marshall Plan, ceasefire, and the Office of Violence Prevention. What do you see as the biggest successes, and what do you see as the biggest shortcomings so far in terms of the implementation of those things?
That's a great question. Well, in terms of Marshall Plan, very comprehensive document, a lot of things in it, and I would say we've probably only implemented about 60% of those recommendations. A lot of our energy around ceasefire. There was some stuff around ceasefire reentry. There was some stuff about hospital interruption. There was some stuff about targeted mentoring. There's a bunch of other stuff we haven't yet touched yet. So a big part of being mayor is making sure that we're making progress on these plans. I think out of the Marshall Plan and what the county has done with pre-trial assessment has been very helpful with the jail capacity issues. And so that's a huge win. But there's some other things that the city and county need to collaborate on in regards to our law enforcement system to really make the plan work like it's designed to work. Number two, in terms of ceasefire, if you look at our shootings or our homicides, they have gone down, but it's still too high. It's still higher than the state average, I think, or a little bit higher than the state average. No, higher than the state average. So that suggests to me that we have to look at the strategy and see what the gaps are. And my hunch and my assumption is that the gaps are that when we speak about sort of message legitimacy, and I'm at all the call-ins, so I'm telling you what I know. If the police chief or the U.S. attorney says, I'm gonna give you jail time with gang enhancement in the DA's office, they mean it. That's a legitimate message. But on the other side, when we talk about opportunity, workforce development, tattoo removal, training, housing, I'm not sure that message is as legitimate. I'm not sure that every time someone asks for a service, they get it, which kind of, the whole thing is about messaging, so it kind of undermines what we're trying to do. So that's why a big focus of myself as mayor will be working with community organizations or private people to figure out what opportunities do these guys need to transition from the life of crime that's lacking, and how do we make sure we get it? Because then our message has real legitimacy. And also looking at some of the things they've done in other cities, like Richmond, where they have a fellowship program where the men are giving something in order for doing things that help them transition from lives of crime to just normal law-abiding lives, right? And there's also an issue with housing in terms of a lot of people want to house folks who have records, or they can't get public housing, or they can't get benefits. So how do we help? So there's a lot of things we need to do in addition to jail time to really make sure that OVP and the Marshall Plan is implemented successfully. But also, I would say we finally have everything hired in the office. Now there's a manager, there's a number two, there's peacekeepers, there's a peacekeeper manager. It's taken 2 years to get to that point. So now that we're staffed, I expect to see even better results, because we have all the positions filled. We have peacekeepers, we know who we're talking to, and now it's just about being consistent with delivering the message.
You suggest quarterly Marshall Plan meetings. Are those public meetings at City Hall or at different locations around the city? What would those look like?
So the Marshall Plan Committee of Stakeholders meets about once or twice a year. So a focus of mine will be working with the city manager and staff to get those meetings happening more regularly. Just because if it's not a focus, people will lose focus, or it's not top of mind, people forget, and we haven't solved or made a significant dent yet, despite the best efforts of our police department on our violent crime issue and crime overall. So we definitely need to revive that committee and ensure it meets. So how I envision is that the committee stakeholders would meet quarterly, like they do once or twice a year, and maybe once a year there's a whole big kind of report out, some sort of event where the general public can go and get the information as well.
And you suggest leveraging your word, the mayoral position, to help with jobs and housing for ceasefire clients. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, well, as mayor, what I lack in hard towers, I can make up for in influence. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, but using the position as mayor and calling employers and calling housing providers and say, listen, this is a priority of the city, so it'll make us all safe. What can you give to this? And in doing so, we should be able to get a lot of community support and real opportunity for these guys who want to transition when they're ready, for stable employment or for stable housing if they need it.
Homelessness. You mentioned, I believe it's the Federal Housing Administration's Back to Work Extenuating Circumstances program. I believe that's what you were referring to. Can you discuss that? I mean, we've talked about tiny houses in the past, and obviously the county has unveiled its proposal in Housing First. How is the city going to address homelessness?
Well, I've been talking about Housing First since I announced in March of last year. So I'm looking forward to the county's recommendations in terms of what does it cost. Because once we figure out our price point, then we can look at our city budget and see what can we afford to give to that, or do I need to find money outside to kind of help with that. But Housing First for me is definitely the way to go. I know there's some private folks who are starting. There's a group that went to New York and saw what the Dole Foundation is doing, so I know there's some private folks interested in emulating that model here, so supporting that. From the city side, continuing the slow process of amending zoning and development codes to allow for tiny houses and micro apartments for those who want them. And also looking at kind of federal dollars for things like housing homeless vets and things of that sort. And also just making sure that in our housing element, in our general plan, we provided a range of housing options so that folks can afford to live in houses in the city. And also working very closely with the Housing Authority, who under the leadership of Peter Ragsdale has been really good partners, from my understanding, with the county task force around sort of vouchers for homeless folks to get them into housing. So the city has a role to play. A lot of it is a support role, and then looking at our development and zoning codes to what we can do better, and then when the county tells us how much Housing First costs, figuring out what, if anything, we can give to that.
And your fifth priority was, you listed as reinvent Stockton, the South Stockton Promise Zone and the Airport Way redevelopment. You know, we've talked a lot about South Stockton and quite a bit. I want to ask you, go a little bit off of that.
Okay.
At the last meeting, about nearly $3 million in affordable housing funds were allocated, and I don't know, 80% of that went to a downtown project, and the rest went to near downtown projects north of Harding Way. And yet none of it went to some of the projects on the south side that were also competing for that money. I'm just, you know, the council approved that unanimously, and I'd just like to kind of hear about the reasoning behind what's going on in those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, well, I can't speak from my colleagues, but before the meeting I had similar questions. And last year in our council strategic planning session, we said downtown Stockton was a priority, revitalizing it, and we signaled to staff that whenever there was grant or funding opportunities, how they align those with council priorities. So again, Stockton's a city with a lot of need, and we can't solve everything at once. But because there's already been a lot of investment in and work done in downtown, it makes sense to, when we can, while not neglecting other parts, but when we can, to steer money in that way to make the project happen. The Cal Weber 40 project just happened, which is affordable housing, 40 affordable housing unit, huge. The whole open windows project. So we're doing our best to make sure that the things we've already started are successful. Because when we do that, it's a benefit for everyone throughout the city, whether it's north, south, east, or west Stockton.
So are you excited just to get started already?
Yeah, I'm tired of talking about it. I just want to get to work. I want to spend the next 4 years waking up every day figuring out how to make Stockton better, which is great. Because before, as a council person, it was part-time. So it's been part of my brain. I had to do something else, and part of my brain was focused on Stockton. But now this is my job. This is my only responsibility. I'm accountable to the voters, and I'm excited about it. It's Stockton's best. I tell people all the time, and it's not just a talking point, but Stockton's best days are truly ahead. There's a lot to be excited about. There's a lot to be hopeful for, but the hope can't be a hope of inactivity. That's required people working and thinking and helping.